Welcome. This first video will be introducing ADA regarding multifamily communities. The Department of Justice published revised regulations for Titles II and Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990 on September 15, 2010. These regulations adopted revised, enforceable accessibility standards titled 2010 ADA Standards for Accessible Design. These standards set minimum regulations for newly designed, constructed, or altered state and local government facilities, public accommodations, and commercial facilities to be readily accessible and usable for people with disabilities. Title III requires public accommodations and commercial facilities to follow the 2010 standard, including 28 CFR Part 36 Subpart D and the 2004 Americans with Disabilities Act Architectural Guidelines. Adoption of the 2010 standard establishes a revised reference point for Title III facilities undertaking readily achievable barrier removal. ADA Title III New Construction Design and constructed facilities for first occupancy on or after January 26, 1993 must be compliant. ADA Title III alterations. Any alteration made to a place of public accommodation or commercial facility to the maximum extent feasible, the altered portion of the facility must be readily accessible and usable for persons with disabilities, including those with wheelchairs. When addressing ADA requirements for multifamily, pay close attention to accessible site arrival points like bus stops, passenger loading zones, public streets and sidewalks, and accessible parking and access aisles. Also, accessible routes from site arrival points to an accessible building entrance, and an accessible route connecting all accessible buildings, facilities, elements, and spaces within a site or within a building. When talking about ADA accessibility for multifamily, we're talking about accessible parking and access aisles at the leasing center, an accessible route between that parking and an accessible entrance on the leasing center, and an accessible route into and throughout the leasing center connecting all accessible elements. That includes telephones, drinking fountains, and restrooms. The Federal Fair Housing Act, and not ADA, deals with dwelling units, buildings, and common areas generally reserved for use by residents and their guests only. The ADA applies only to places of public accommodation. In general, that's limited to your leasing office, not the pool or other amenities that are available for use only by residents and their invited guests. You can see how confusing it can be on multifamily communities. So what we'll talk about is simply accessibility. We will continue with ADA standards, but only for the leasing office. Future videos will continue with ADA Chapter 1, Application and Administration, ADA Chapter 2, Scoping Requirements, Chapter 3, Building Blocks, and Chapters 4 through 10 of the Americans with Disabilities Act Architectural Guidelines. Those are the technical requirements for the ADA standards for accessible design. Thank you for joining me and watching this video. I will continue with the Americans with Disabilities Act regarding multifamily communities.